I was not like thinking about writing a book. And then as it grew, I was like, this would be really cool to write about. And instead of having my imposter syndrome take over, I was like, why not? Why can't I write it? So I just started it, and here we are.
Hey Jess, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited you're here.
I'm excited to be here.
You're someone I admire greatly, and so I'm super excited that you're here. We get to talk a little bit, but specifically, we get to talk a little bit about your manuscript, your future book as well, which is like, honestly, I'm completely fangirling over. You and I met through Instagram, which is
Mm-hmm.
such an like wild way that nowadays we can just meet each other through DMs and become friends and work together. I edited your, I had the absolute pleasure and honor to edit your debut novel, which is coming out potentially this year. We were talking about dates. You're not quite sure. We'll see. Dates are coming. But yeah, it's such a great story that with characters that literally dig into your heart and my gosh. So thank you.
Well, it was my pleasure. It was so cool to have just like again meeting on Instagram and just to have say, "Oh, hey, I can do copy editing. I can do proofreading." I'm like, "Fantastic. That's what I need." So it was meant to be, you know.
It really
We have to
was.
do it that way. And because I just
It really
also
was.
found my cover artist through Instagram, which is insane. It's just all through the platform.
It's amazing. And like actually, so my husband's an author and he met his cover artist through Instagram as well, like and his editor through Instagram. So
Wow.
yeah, like it's such a cool space where you can actually use it as a place to connect and meet
Yeah.
people and it's so much less stiff than like LinkedIn or,
Hmm.
any of those like Indeed or any of that and stuff. And so
Yeah.
I love that it's become a place like that where it can actually be a community space. I feel like for so long I thought of it as just kind of a mindless scrolling place. And don't get me wrong, it still is that a little bit. But also for it to be like what I think it was meant to be when it was created, which is like a community, a space to meet people and connect,
Yeah,
which is so
absolutely.
cool.
And I think that especially with at least our bookstagrams, like we've catered to it so that our feeds are congruous to who we are. So like we have character art that's not AI. We have like editors, we have publishers, we have different people on our feeds that are who we want to communicate with. Whereas like I've
Hmm.
heard luckily have not seen it myself, but I've heard that there is some toxicity, especially in like the book talk area, and just
Mm.
it's so nice to not have an experience with that, I suppose.
Yeah, I haven't had any of that experience. I feel like it's the same thing as with life when you're not on the internet. It's like what you're putting out
Yeah.
there or what you're creating is also what you're going to receive back. Because I follow so many book talks. I mean, I don't really post, I guess. So maybe that's like why I haven't experienced super toxic stuff. But overall, I feel like the community I've met through books and like everything on Instagram is so much fun. I've gotten so many book recs that like I would have never even heard that book in my life or even
Yeah.
tried to read it. And now I've read it and it's like one of my favorite books. And I
Mhm.
just like you can't beat that. It's the coolest thing ever.
1,000%. And it just gives you so much more opportunity, especially like an indie author like myself. It gives more opportunity for us as people, as a
Yeah.
community, to get our books out there. Whereas, like
Hmm.
with Trad Pub, it's of course a lot easier because they pay for marketing and stuff like that. But this community is just like doing the work for me almost, which is fantastic.
It's so cool. And I know, I mean, like I feel like we're in a really cool time for indie authors where you can create your own work. You can release it the way you want. There's no one breathing down your neck of how it has to look or like you don't have to like beg for a bunch of different people so that eventually your work can get out there. Like having social media, having, communities you can build online, it creates such a cool opportunity for indie authors to be able to actually get their work out there and actually in the hands of people and not just like oh, it's released and no one's read it, right? But like
Yeah.
people are stoked for it. They're excited for it. They're like, yes, I have to share it with everyone. And I just feel like that is the coolest time to be alive when it comes to books and art and like just the
Mhm.
freedom that it's given for
Yeah,
everyone.
I agree.
Yeah, so cool. I'm curious for you with In Beds of Flowers, which is your debut novel. How did this story first like come into fruition? What was like that first little like seedling idea to where it is now?
So it actually came about through a few different things. First was Outlander, which, like, have you seen Outlander?
Gosh. Yes, of
Okay.
course.
So you know how there's a concept in Outlander, especially in the first season, that I kind of adopted into In Beds of Flowers. And so I was like, that's just a really interesting concept to me. And then it was slowly developed. Like I would say, I guess not super slowly, but within the next week or two, more and more just started to pile on. And I am going to be honest, I did a Stephanie Meyer where it like came to me in my dreams.
No
So like
way.
I would have more ideas. And then I had my phone, like I always had the notes app on my phone just readily available for me to put them down because no way you're going to remember if you just go back to sleep. So I took
Hmm.
them all down and it like definitely grew as I wrote and as I developed the first draft and then the second draft and third draft and kept going. But it now has turned into this story that I am so proud of, which is crazy that people are actually enjoying reading as they're going through their beta reads.
Hmm. Were you like, when you first got the idea, were you like, okay, you had the intention of writing a book, or was it just like the idea then became the intention to write a book?
It was an idea and then became the attention. So
Okay.
when I first had it, I was not like thinking about writing a book. And then as it grew, I was like, this would be really cool to write about. And instead of having my imposter syndrome take over, I was like, why not? Why can't I write it? So I just started it and here we are.
That's so badass. I love that. I love that it came from an idea and then you were like, you know what? Screw it. Let's just like turn this into something
Yeah.
because no book exists quite like this. So if someone's going to create it, it might as well be me, right?
Yeah,
What's your process? Like,
exactly.
what was your process in creating it? Did you just like sit down at a computer and just go, or did you like outline it? Like, what was your like art
I am
process?
a total pantser. I have
Okay.
no plotting. I
Okay.
like if you ask me like, "Oh, how many books do you think that the series is going to be?" I still say 3 or 4 because I'm not sure. It's all
Yeah.
just like flowing. So that when I wrote In Beds of Flowers, it was the same process. It was I would come up with what to do in the next chapter as I wrote it. There
Interesting.
were big points like I knew what I wanted to happen at the end and I knew the characters I wanted to be involved with that, but I had no idea about how exactly they were going to get there. And then they just got
Okay.
there, it just happened.
Nice. So you like had the end. You're like, okay, I know they're gonna eventually get there, but then you would just sit down with a blank piece of paper and just fucking write and just go.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Dang.
works best for me. I've tried planning honestly because I'm like maybe that would make me more organized and maybe
Hmm.
but it just doesn't flow well enough for me to just
Yeah.
convert my whole writing style. So I'm about to finish book 2 and I'm just like let me just write it and if I don't like it, I can change it when I'm editing. Like it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever feel like because of that method that you get like blocked with ideas or not sure what you're gonna write in the next part?
I think that it actually has prevented me from getting blocked, which I know doesn't
Okay.
necessarily make sense because if you have a plan, it's logical that you would be able to follow that and write easier. But I have not, and fingers crossed, I have never experienced writer's block.
Yeah.
So it's just all kind of come out. And like I said, if I read it back and I'm like, no, I change it up. But I'm a big person who is into the first draft concept. Who I'm not trying to make it perfect when I'm writing it
Hmm.
initially. I will make it better as I edit it in the second, third, fourth time, however many.
Yeah. You're like brain dumping basically, right? Just getting
Exactly.
everything out, making sure that everything that you're thinking of is coming out, but then you're like, it's always malleable. It's not permanent, right? It's not set in stone, so you can go back and just change whatever you want. I
Yeah.
mean, that's really interesting. This is why I love asking this question because I feel like everyone has such a different method. I interviewed another author too, and she is very meticulous and organized with her outline and how she, had built out like complete character development things for each character, like this is who they are and all these background things and like really detailed stuff, right? And I thought that was so interesting to create that way. So for you with your characters, did you have like any in-depth ideas about even who the characters were, or was that even up in the air too?
It it actually was up in the air. I
Okay.
knew that I like who I wanted them to be in the barest of senses. Like I knew that I wanted Dion to be a kind person, and I knew that I
Hmm.
wanted Kerrigan to be stubborn and a little bit like fierce, but also kind of like malleable, like you said, like to be adjustable and just kind of grow and all of that. So I knew their basic traits. But as I was writing, and I'm sure that you've heard this from other authors you've interviewed, they started to take over and they
Yeah.
started to like be themselves. And so they're like you, and you did it in editing too. You pointed out maybe like 2 or 3 lines. You were like, this doesn't seem to go along with who this is as a character, but it was to the evil one. everyone
Yeah,
else,
that's true.
everyone else, it was like they are all like keeping going with what they need to be
They
doing.
were.
But the evil
Yeah.
one, you were like, that's too nice. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah, I know. There's like the twisted part of my mind that's all like, listen, this evil guy, if he's gonna be full evil, which he was, I was like, there's a couple parts here where I'm like, he would be way
Yeah.
worse. And like, I love that you were like, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, I
Yeah.
agree with you. I'm curious then with another part that I love like about the characters, especially Althea, was like the relationships that she held with her family. So like with
Mhm.
her mom and her dad and like the banter and just like her siblings as well. Like how was that creating those relationships? Is that something that you feel like applies to your life, or was that something that I'm just curious where that came from? Because for me it super resonated with me and like touched me in my heart.
Yeah, it is applicable for me. I am very close with all of my siblings, and I'm close with my mom and my dad, but it's just the banter was also definitely inspired by things. It's more so with my siblings. Like, there's a lot more banter with them than there is with my parents. As an eldest daughter, I had a difficult time, I think, writing a youngest daughter. So it was like
Okay.
trying to fix, and it was almost like writing how I saw, like, in aspects of my little sisters, and so it was cool to like also bring them into Althea because I also see myself very much in her. So it was like
Hmm.
every time I wrote parts of them and parts of me into her, it was like developing this huge, hugely resonating character with me and my family. And now
Hmm.
I love her so much. I can't picture her being any different from a character that she is.
Yeah, she's like a family member now, right? Like someone
Yeah,
you feel
exactly.
connected to and know so well. Yeah, it literally just a full. I have 4 siblings. How many siblings do you have?
So I have 8,
Oh wow!
but
Oh my gosh. Okay,
but
so
there's
you're
like
the
steps
oldest
and
of a big
halves.
family.
So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Got it. Because that's a big family that Althea is in as well.
Yeah.
And so I had been thinking of whether you were part of a big family because there's a certain dynamic with that, right? Like the way
Yeah.
siblings interact and the way you have their back, and even if you don't like super, if you're not the same type of person, you're very different people, but you still kind of have this like sense of camaraderie, right?
Mhm.
And that's why I was like, she's got to have siblings, dude. This
Yeah.
girl's like, wait, knows it way too well.
I did, yeah, and so like I have 8, but then I have my stepbrother and stepsister who like we've been related for too long that I barely ever call them that, but
Hmm.
we are all very close in age, me and my brother, and then them. So it was like very nice to also have then Althea with her 3 siblings the same way,
Hmm.
like very close in age and then very close in how they interacted with each other.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was a fun time to write all of the family, honestly.
Yeah, I that was a big chunk of the beginning of the story, right? Where you're developing their relationships, and I was I loved it. Like I was so enthralled. I think I told you this before that when I this was the first project I edited where I actually had to read it first and let myself binge read it first and then go back and edit it because otherwise I would get way too lost into the story and then be like, whoa, whoa, girl, you have not been editing. You have just been reading. You need to go back. And so like I would be like, I'd read like 5 chapters at a time and then I'd go back and edit like and stuff. And I think that's so cool to see a first project like yours that pulls in a reader like that. And I'm seeing that with all of the beta readers, right? All of them are saying the same stuff, which I feel like is just confirmation of what I already knew. But how does that feel for you to like get all this feedback when, I mean, that must be such a wild feeling, right? Like, what is it like?
Absolutely insane. Like I when I finished, I said I thought that it's a good book. You know, it's what good enough to get editing, and it's good enough to put out there to beta readers. That's what my opinion of it was.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started actually seeing the beta reader feedback, and it's just blown me away, honestly. That because as as you've said, the beginning portion is a lot of development for the characters. It's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
just getting to know them and getting to see how they interact with each other. And it's not a lot of the action that's very popular now, especially in fantasy. So it was like, I don't know how interested they're going to be once they get to like a page 100 and there's still no big action, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was astounded that people were finishing the first part one, which is again mainly the family and the character development, and saying that was fantastic, moving into part two. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, part one was good and part two was great. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
equal feedback, equally amazing feedback for both parts, which is really validating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I read when I did the first sample edit and I only read your first chapter, I already was like, I'm sold. Like, give me the rest of this book. Like, I love it. um, how do you feel like you as a person have changed from like when you first started writing to where you are now with a completed novel?
That's a hard one. I would say that with writing, it has also driven me to be creative in other aspects of my life where I was always a person who, for example, liked art. I really liked drawing, painting, all that stuff. And then I also got involved in stuff like when I was in high school, I was in like theater groups and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of pick up any creative task that I can. I crocheted for a little bit, knitted for a little bit. And so it was really fun to uh, basically feel like that part of me was being developed, that I could take this time and dedicate that creativity to something that was also making me, I don't know, feel just wholly involved with a story that I was creating. And it was just such
Mm-hmm.
a unique, I think, process to be a part of. And it's my own process, but it was almost like I was stepping into it as I continued to write in the story. And then I do work full time, and I have been able to take that creativity and put it into like work aspects, creating like content for all of that. So it's also been nice to not just be limited to creativity in my non-working hours.
So you feel like it's like unlocked a more creative side of you and like a freedom or permission to express yourself in like all the aspects of your life and not just like in one little box.
Exactly. And it's been so much fun. Even with so me and my fiance, we own our house, and I even like started changing up my decor. Like I made different decorations, and I made like I when he got me bookshelves, and I had so much fun arranging the books in a way that like made me excited for the decoration of it. So it was
Mm-hmm.
just being able to pull all of that, all stemming from me kind of unleashing this creative aspect
Mm-hmm.
of myself.
That's cool. But you said that you've been always kind of a creative person with like theater and painting and drawing and things like that. How do you feel like that expression or like the process with that is different than writing is for you?
I think I think if I were to be a planner, I think it would be very different because, you know, with if I were a planner for or plotter, I guess is like the technical term if you're a plotter versus pantser. If I were a plotter for my novel, then I think that the process would be very different when it comes to like painting or when it comes to just I don't know, a drawing just freehand kind of stuff like that, because that's always been how I also did art. Like I would always
Okay.
just freehand a drawing, freehand a painting. Um, And when I did theater and when I did, like I was in band and choir and everything like that, obviously, like you're reading the music and everything. So that just was a different kind of aspect of it. But when you take it into just artistic, then I think it flows well with exactly how I wrote in Beds of Flowers, that there's no planning. I just did it and hope for the
Yeah.
best.
You're consistent across all platforms.
Yeah.
You're like, just give me a paintbrush, give me a pen, give me a keyboard. I'm just gonna throw it out there. It's
Yeah.
gonna go. It's gonna be what it is. That's awesome. I love that. So you said yourself that you haven't had writer's block, but has there been points of like overwhelm or like where you've been, I mean, you're working full time too, so that's like a lot that you're juggling, which it just made me remember the reel that you posted where you were like, how do you work a job and write in your after time? And you were like, eldest daughter.
Yeah, that's me.
Eldest daughter, you're like, that's me. This is how I do it. You're welcome. And it's funny, all the comments underneath are like, yeah, I'm an eldest daughter, same. Like everyone just totally relating to it. But if there is a time that you feel overwhelmed or like can't focus or any of those things, like, is there something that you do to like bring you back, or are you able to just sit down and do it anyways?
I actually haven't necessarily had that issue when it comes to writing, at least not often, because it is, to me, writing is that taking a step back. It is me getting that time to myself. So I don't necessarily need to take a step back from my step back, if that makes
I
sense.
see.
There have
Yeah.
been times where, like, if a scene is overwhelming, either emotionally or if I'm having trouble coming up with exactly how I want it to go, that I do go and I grab a snack or grab some water or like go and talk to my fiance or pet my dog or something like that. But it's always for like a few minutes. And then I come back, and usually, again, like I said, I'm not aiming for perfection, so I just write it and hope for the best and edit it later on.
I love that. That's awesome. Just a quick moment, recheck the dog, a snack, fiance,
Yeah,
someone like that, and you're ready to go back. Speaking of
exactly.
like overwhelming scenes, something that I really loved about your storytelling, but specifically with Althea, is the way that you kind of wrote the internal struggle. So, like, when you're dealing with something really difficult, which whenever anyone reads this book, they're gonna see Althea going through some tough times, right? Um, the way that you wrote how she handled that, right? Like she oh my gosh, I can't even say that word. She puts it in different sections in her mind, right? Like, and I felt like it was so relatable and really touched me where I was like, I totally get that feeling, or I've experienced that sensation. So what was that like for you to write that internal dialogue, that struggle, and like, where does that come from?
It was such an amazing experience to be able to write that into Althea, because that's how I also have handled my trauma and difficulty in the past. Um, Especially the parts where she like numbs herself. I've had that, like, that's how I have handled traumas in the past. And so just being able to put that into her was almost cathartic. It was almost therapeutic also, just to write it out and be like, this in itself, just putting it into a character that I am creating is validating. So it was really just a, an amazing process again, just to write that into
Yeah.
Althea. Um, and I think there was a second part to your question. I can't remember.
Just like where did that come from? But I think you were answering that as well. Like this is something that is very personal for you and you understood it, right? I think why it hit me, because for me I felt the same way. Like I had never read someone write out kind of what had been my experience with, like, really tough times, like the way she talks about closing the box and just doing things like that I'm like, okay, yes, like that is kind of how I've handled things, but I've never read it that way in any book where someone actually talks about it and describes it. And because it's first person, I think it makes it more powerful, because it's almost like you're reading about yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that it makes sense why you totally understand that, because it's coming from you, right? This is your own experience and you're able to put it down, but you're not the only one, right? And so I think that's huge. A lot of people are going to read this book and be like, yes, someone is finally writing out my internal thoughts, which is powerful.
Yeah, and I agree that the first person definitely helped with that effect. It's also just when I was writing it, it was helpful for me to, I kind of picture conversations and comments in the future of being like, no one experiences this, you know, no one has had this experience, and me being able to be like, well, actually, I did. And that
Mm-hmm.
also continues into book two, where she has so many experiences that in my head I'm like, maybe a lot of people haven't had this exact method of
Mm-hmm.
coping or this exact method of healing, and I have. So it's like it's validating for me to be able to say, to see that others and some beta readers have also said the same thing. They're like, I have experienced this as well, thank you for putting
Mm-hmm.
this into words.
Yeah. Does that feel vulnerable at all to, I mean, I know art in and of itself is vulnerable, right? But to be like writing something that is so personal to you, a coping mechanism and the way you handle trauma, and you're putting this into something that you're going to be putting out there in the hands of a bunch of people, does that feel like vulnerable or raw?
Yeah, it does. It definitely is vulnerable. It's exposing a bit of myself, probably more than I initially anticipated as I was writing Althea. But now that she's written, it's again, she's her separate person, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't change her. So I love
Mm-hmm.
exactly what she's doing, and then it's also then been like self love because it's just
Mm-hmm.
directly reflected into how I have seen myself in the past and how I've dealt with trauma and healing. And so having that in her, yes, it's vulnerable, but it's also healing in its own way.
Totally. Because at the end of the day, she's not you. She is
Yeah.
her individual own character. And I could see how that would create more self love because you're like, I just love this character. I've fallen
Mhm.
in love with her. And she has so many little pieces that are me. And if I can love her where she's at and all her messiness and greatness and all that, then like, who am I not to totally love myself as well where I'm at, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Okay, I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyways. Um, what book series or like other books do you feel like inspired you to write the type of story you wrote?
To write fantasy, I know it's going to be a cliche answer, but definitely SJM.
I
She
knew it. I even see your
renewed,
pillow
yeah.
behind you right now, okay? Like I know.
Yeah, you serious.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay, anyways,
so my
continue.
sister actually got that for me, but I can't not have it, you know? So it was definitely her. And I think a lot of people have had this experience too, where they stopped reading for a long period of time.
Hmm.
And I did. I stopped reading for a very long time, unless it was like a reread. I've reread Twilight. I can't even tell you how many times in my adult life. So I reread a lot and very rarely read new things. But then when I read SJM, I suddenly, like now, I can't even tell you how many books I've read in the past 2.5 years after reading that. So yes, I was inspired to write a fantasy novel because of that, but I've also always liked fantasy. Like that was the books
Hmm.
I gravitated to when I was younger as well. That and of course the dystopian, you know, Divergent, Hunger Games, stuff like
Yeah,
that.
of course. We were all into
But
those books, I feel like.
exactly. And I think a lot of people have gone through that evolution. Like you took a break basically from like 2014 to 2020, 2022-ish, and then you read
Hmm.
SJM and you were like, I'm good. And you can keep on reading. And then I think it was also when I started reading so frequently again that I then was like, when I had the idea to write a book, it didn't seem so far fetched because I was reading
Hmm.
so many of them that I was like, hey,
Yeah.
I can do that. I can be one of those people too.
Totally, totally. Yeah, I always love how many you post so many memes about like Throne of Glass. And I'm curious, like, so I'm only partway through Throne of Glass. I haven't finished the series yet, but specifically, what about that series, like, just hits you in the heart?
Oh my God.
I know that's a really
So many
broad
things.
question.
I think it's the character development. Honestly, the plot in itself is fantastic, in my opinion. But when it comes to the development of Selena, And when it comes to like the development of Manon and all of the characters, all of the witches, all of Dorian, like all of them get hurt and get better like once or multiple times in that series. And it's just so it's relatable to watch that happen to characters like it happens to people, even though it's in like there's witches and there's wyverns
Yeah.
and there's magic and craziness. But it's also very raw, especially in when you get to the points of loss in the book or the series. It's just very when you read the characters, you believe their pain and it makes you feel for them. Whereas, and like, Akatar is fantastic, but I didn't feel as connected to Feyre's development nearly as much as Selena's and Manon's. I even felt more connected to Nesta because of how much she developed after her trauma in Akasif. So I was like,
Yeah.
that is I felt more connected to her development, even though as a character she started off kind of rocky. Now, and especially as an eldest daughter, I think it's like, hey, I see you.
Yeah.
You got better. You've healed. And I think I actually posted this in Threads a little bit back. Like, why do you hate Nesta if you're an eldest daughter? And a lot of it was like, well, because she didn't take care of her younger siblings. I would never let that happen to my younger siblings. And I get that part. I would never be the one to put the burden onto my younger siblings. But I also don't, and speaking as if she's a real person, I don't blame her for handling the loss of her mother and her father not taking care of them the way she did.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, when I read the last book, Silver Flames, that totally changed my view on Nesta. Because up until then, I'd been like, girl, get it together.
Yeah, exactly.
What is up with you?
And when you first start that, like when you're reading like the first, I think it's like 10 to 15 chapters at least, where she is still brash and she's still not willing to change.
And
then
you're living
she
in her
starts
mind,
changing.
which is
Yeah.
like jarring to just hear her thoughts all the time. You're like, whoa,
There's
it's a
so
lot.
little self-value in them, like so little self-worth. And it's not
Yeah.
hard to understand how a person who feels that way about themselves would behave like that towards the people that they love and who love them.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually read the first few books, and then I had multiple people tell me not even worth reading the last one. Literally, they were like, don't even read Nesta's book. It's just Nesta. She's yada yada, whatever. And I was like, okay. So I took a like months and months break in between. And then finally I was like, you know what? I'm going to read it. And I'm so glad I read it. And I don't know why people told me not to, because even though I have some like qualms with the way it ended, like the last 5% of the book, overall, I feel like that of the whole series shows the strongest like character development, like the way that she shifts and grows, and you see her mindset change, you see the way she treats people change, you see the way she receives change, and like just everything. And I thought I loved it. It was one of my favorite books until the last 5%.
And just the last bit. No, I don't think anyone's very happy with exactly how it ended.
Yeah.
But like you said, she just grew so much, and I think that's why, like, while I do like Feyre as a character and I did love the stories as I was reading them, there's no need almost for her to develop because
Yeah.
she is
She
already
was
like
already
a caring
there.
person. She's already the nurturer, the provider. And so yeah, she had to heal from trauma from like everything that happened at the end of Akatar and like through the beginning of Akamath. So like she had healing to do. But
Yeah.
once she did, her story was like she was herself. She is still that
Yeah.
person. She's still nurturing and caring and providing. But Nesta had so much healing to do. And so it was
Yeah.
interesting to be able to read that. Whereas, like, Feyre was just a nice story to read, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's difficult, I feel like, to see a character that is so controversial. I don't know if that's necessarily the right word, but someone who like really rubs people the wrong way, to change them the way that SJM did to the end of the book, I feel like is really difficult. But when it's done well, it's so powerful to see someone change like that and have it be believable. And I think it really was her growth and the way it happened. She stumbles like over and over and over again the whole way through, but like it's so believable. And I feel like, I actually interviewed someone else too. We talked about it, and she was talking about how like it's interesting to see the way she handles trauma versus the way Feyre handles trauma, and like Elaine handles trauma. And I know she's hoping that the next book that comes out is Elaine. What do you feel?
I think it has to be, and I would be disappointed if it's not. Like, I'm still okay with seeing some of Nesta's POV and some of like Cassian's POV in it if it needs to be included. But I do want to see Elaine's development, because at this time I think she's kind of pushed aside because like, and I think that's the middle sibling debacle that they're always like the last thought almost.
That's a good point.
So it's like, so she's the last thought for the readers. And it's because she is like the baker, and she also stood aside while Feyre was providing for the family, and she's like, she did flowers and she didn't grow a garden of vegetables and all that stuff that people want to be mad at her about. But it's also like, she also experienced trauma. She experienced like a lot at the end of Akawar and even at the beginning. And then it's almost being seen as like, oh, well, because she's not loud about it, who cares? Like, Nesta was loud about it, and so everyone either hates or loves Nesta. But Elaine's just there. So I do want to see her story, and of course we're all wondering who she's going to end up with. So
totally, right? There's so many options. Like, we really don't know at this point. I think it would be interesting if she had her own book, because that's been my like biggest qualm with her, is I just felt like she doesn't add too much to the story, and they just kind of, she's there, and she's experiencing the same stuff, but like you're not really seeing any of her story or her development. So I could see that being a really interesting book. I feel like SJM does a good job of creating characters that are a little bit messy, you know, where like they're going through really tough times, or like in Throne of Glass, for example, Selena is literally like the messiest character. At first, she's not the messiest, but she is like, she's not this like perfect heroine, right? Who walks in and is just like, I have everything all together, right? She goes through it and has to like struggle with her own stuff. For you, like when you read those books, like what is like a lesson or something that you feel like is what is so relatable to people and why they love these characters?
I think it is that they're not perfect. You don't want to read a book about a perfect person. That's not relatable, and there's no development that's possible unless they get broken from their ideal of what they are as perfect, and then they have to heal from that, which then that's the book. That's them. They're not perfect, and they have to develop that. So I think that when it comes to these characters who are so obviously not whole, or so obviously have faults, even if like they haven't yet experienced their trauma, it's the human experience, and it makes you want to read it, even if it's in this fantastical world that you step into that it doesn't unfortunately exist.
I know, and I think a lot of people, if they haven't read the series or any of these books, are like, oh, it's a romance book, or oh, it's a fantasy book, right? And they just kind of discount it, that it's this lighthearted thing. And I feel like I feel like reading fiction and fantasy, you can learn so much, especially if you're open to it, right? Just as much, if not more, than like a nonfiction book that's going to be like, this is how you deal with this, or yada yada, right? Like being able to relate and connect with a character and seeing them grow and overcome, or how they relate with people and stuff, I feel like that can be like the biggest life lesson giver. And that's one of the reasons I actually love reading. Part of the reason is for fun, but also I love that like you can apply it to your life and be like, this is what I'm gleaning from it. And that's huge.
Yeah, for sure. And then like you also get the other side of it, where yes, you're experiencing these very real people, and so it makes you able to relate to them, but it's in this unreal world. And people want to say like, oh, it's unrealistic, and this is not, you're escaping, you're doing escapism. But it's not even that. It's that when you step into that world, it's almost therapeutic. You're like, yeah, if you're having an overwhelming day, I do want to step into a fake world for a minute. And you end up feeling
Mhm.
better 20 minutes later instead of like
Yeah.
having this like just spiraling or having to compartmentalize or doing any other kind of coping that you might think of because you got to step away into this just
Hmm.
world that's not yours and is just so fantastic. You just get to see
Yeah.
all of these people experiencing things that you're experiencing in their own world.
Exactly. But it doesn't make sense to me why fantasy books or like romance books get so much hate as a, way that you disconnect from reality because I'm like, is that not what y'all are doing? Right?
Yeah.
We're all doing it in one way. Like whether you're scrolling on your phone or you're putting on a TV show or you're watching YouTube or you're getting drunk or whatever, right? Like we all
Yeah.
have our ways that we're like disconnecting, disassociating from our day-to-day life. And I feel like reading, there is no way that that is at the top of the list of an unhealthy coping mechanism. Like, how? How can you even think
Yeah.
that? Like, this,
Like it's like the old saying like, "Mom, I'm not doing drugs, I'm getting books." Like you just
yeah,
I'm not going out and partying. I'm not a person who's going to the bar and spending like $50 on like two or three drinks because it's insane
yeah,
now. But like when you're sitting in your home and you're reading during that time, it's definitely not the most unhealthy way of escaping that, like you
no.
said, people put on the TV and they want to say that they're better than romance readers.
Yes, that I'm like, excuse me. Yeah, that's also another thing that I love about reading is it's the most solitary activity that also has the opportunity for like building the best community,
Yeah.
which is so interesting that you can do it on your own and just like have the best time ever. But then when you connect with someone else who's read the book you loved, or someone recommends a book that you read and you're like, oh my gosh, this was so great. Like, it's the coolest way to connect with someone. Like, I
Yeah.
just feel like there's no, if I talk to someone and they're like, yes, I loved this book, like, I'm like, we're instant besties. Let's hang out. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's like that's what I think is what's really cool about the really popular books, the SJM books and stuff. Is like people are like, oh, it's too trendy and it's not cool. Like, don't it's not worth a read because I don't want to like mess up the fandom or something, right? And I feel like that's so
Yeah.
stupid because the cool thing about a book being that popular is that it does open up the opportunity for even more people to connect, for
Yeah.
more people to relate with each other, to like strangers that live on opposite sides of the world to be like, I read that book too and I loved it. And how can you call that a bad thing? That fandoms
Yeah.
are great as long as we ain't hating each other. But overall, I
Exactly.
feel like community is amazing, and any way that we can find a way to connect with each other as humans, I think is just always a gift.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the amount of messages and people I've connected with just because of a love of SJM or a love of other fantasy books, or even just
Mhm.
like a mutual post of like character art. It's like, hey, I love them too. Like, let's be
Mhm.
friends.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, now that we're talking about books, I'm curious like what's a recent book that you've read that you loved and you would recommend to
Oh my
someone?
God.
Well, you're like so many.
I have been recommending it to everybody
Okay.
I know that is into like romance, fantasy, and like
Okay.
dark romance a little bit. It's called The Blood That Binds Us, and then the second one
Okay.
is The Bonds That Break Us. And Hannah, it is the first, so it's going to be a trilogy, but it's the first series that I've read since SJM, which was like, I think I finished the mass verse in like January of 2023. It's
Okay.
the first series that I've read that had me like gripped that I was reading, and I was
Really?
like, the enemies were enemying and the storyline was interesting. And like the magic system was something that I personally haven't read before, so it was like really interesting. And then I love the couple in the book with so much of my heart. So
Okay, I'm so
I
excited.
You have to read it. You have to read it. It's on
Okay.
ebook. It's paperback, and the paperbacks are really pretty, by the way. But I can't even. Like, you should.
Oh my
Oh my
God.
god. Okay, I'm sorry, because you're gonna have to go to the author's page and look at the
Okay.
character art and understand why
Okay.
I'm going crazy right now.
Okay. I will. I will. I promise. That sounds amazing. The Blood That Binds Us. I feel like I saw that on Instagram or something on someone recommending that book, and
It
so
was
I will.
probably me.
It was probably it might have been you, but I think it was someone else. The Blood That Binds Us. Okay, I feel like right after this, I'm about to like dive into that and find this book. I've been reading a bunch of standalone novels, but I feel like I still haven't finished Throne of Glass though. I need to get my butt into gear and finish it.
You
I
do.
think it's
What
like
book are
the
you on?
books are so big. I just finished
Yeah.
Queen of Shadow.
Oh, okay. So you're okay. You're into it.
I still have like three books, right? I think that's how many I've
Yeah, and they
read.
are the biggest ones, so that's
Yeah.
fair. And you have to do the tandem read because you probably won't want to read book seven if you don't tandem read.
Okay, everyone keeps telling me this, but here I'm going to ask you this question too as an author. So, my husband is an author, and I was telling him about the tandem read thing. I was like, yeah, like I've had two or three people recommend this to me. You got to read them, follow the guide online or whatever, because of book seven being tough to read on its own. But he was like, that's not the way the artist created it, right? Like, if she had wanted it to be told in that way, then she would have told the story that way. But she didn't. She told it one book at a time. And so he's recommended, like, oh, I recommend you read it in the order that the author wrote it, because that is the way the story pacing was created, right?
Mhm.
And so that's kind of where I was like leaning towards that way, especially since I actually have the Kindle like fat book. I have the like all-in-one Kindle book. So it's all of the
Okay,
Throne of Glass books in one like
gotcha.
PDF thing on my Kindle. So I could do it. But anyways, I'm curious as an author for you, if you wrote like a book series and the people were tandem reading it, like what are your thoughts on that?
If people were chose to tandem read because like that was a possibility with my story, then I think that would be honestly their decision. Like if they think that
Mm-hmm.
it's more interesting that way, or if they think that you're able to understand more of what's happening with the plot that way, then like I
Mm-hmm.
want there to be as complete of a sense of what's going on as possible. And with the tandem read, I think that it's just difficult because even though it's a very, very good book, it takes place at the exact same time as Empire of Storms. Or, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you're reading the same timeline twice, just in different POVs. And while the
Mm-hmm.
POVs add that dimension, you're not getting like the same story, it's just in the same time. It still can feel redundant because you're like, yes, I know that this is the case or this is what's going on in that story, so I know that this is going to
Okay.
happen. Whereas when you do the tandem read, you get to see like, okay, I just saw this and now I'm going right into the other part of Empire of Storms and continuing with that. So
Okay.
it's I recommend the tandem read, and then there's also the matter of like some people read Assassin's Blade after Crown of
Mm-hmm.
Midnight, like she wrote it. And I personally, like, I've read it both ways. I liked reading it first better.
Okay. Yeah. I read it after Crown of Midnight.
Hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
what I mean, I probably found some guide online or something that said that's the order to read it. And so I read it in
Yeah.
that order. But yeah, I've heard people say like recommended to read it first. I think now that I've read it, maybe it would have been nice first, only because Selena, I felt like I didn't really get her in the first
Yeah.
book, if that makes sense. I felt like I was like, all right, girl, what's your shtick? Like I didn't,
Yeah.
and I kind of felt like she was a little bit one dimensional in the first book.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until like, I mean, towards the end of it, maybe less so, but it wasn't until like the next books that I was like, okay, yes, like I'm
Yeah.
into this. I'm connecting with the character more. So maybe if I would have read Assassin's Blade first, that would
Yeah.
have added that dimension already.
I've read it
Yeah.
twice. And so like the first time I read it in the order that when I Googled it, I Googled like Throne of Glass order, and it did put Assassin's Blade first. So it was like, oh, okay. So I read it first, and only after I read it for the first time did I see that it's actually supposed to be read third. And then so there was a long enough gap, like I think like 6 months or something between my first read and my second. So it was a little bit of newness to the story. And when I read Throne of Glass instead of Assassin's Blade first, I was like, why? Why is this like who her character is? Like, why is she
Yeah.
the way that she is? Why is she in Dovier? Why is she in like these places? Why is she so
Yeah.
hurt by her past? But then when I read Assassin's Blade first, it made me feel more connected to her from the get-go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you do the tandem read both times you read it?
I did not. So I read
Okay.
I read it in order, my first read, and then second read, I did the tandem read. Highly recommend the tandem
Okay.
because I'm telling you, Hannah, even though as I was reading it, I was like, wow, this seems like it's a good book. I just wanted to get to Kingdom of Ash. I just wanted to see what was
Yeah.
happening with her. And so I basically like skim read it the first time. And so only when I did the tandem read did I actually get to appreciate the story for what it was.
Okay, so now I feel like I have to listen to you only because you did it both ways.
Yeah.
And you still are like, this is the better way. Okay, well then I'm just gonna figure out how to do that on my Kindle because I'm gonna have to be like,
Okay.
put a little bookmark, switch to the next book, whatever, go back and forth. But yeah, because I actually started it. I'm like a few chapters into Tower of Dawn, right? That's what it's called. Tower of
Okay.
Dawn?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just was like, all right, I need like a break, and so I stopped reading. But maybe that's why. Maybe I need to do the tandem read, and then that'll
Yeah.
keep me like held into it. Okay. You've sold me. You've sold me.
Okay.
All right. I'll make sure and do that. I love that. I feel like this might, okay, this has been the coolest thing about this podcast is because my intention was not to make this a book podcast, but like I have already, accidentally happened. And it keeps happening. I keep like having entire episodes where we just talk about books, and it's the best thing ever though. I feel like how can you hate this, especially if you're a reader? This
Yeah.
is like I live for this, right? Like getting to just talk about what you love, and that's basically what we've done this entire episode.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, this has been so fun though. I feel like just like getting to hear your like mindset into creating the book. In Beds of Flowers, like obviously I loved reading it, but then I was excited. I was hoping that we would get to talk about it, and for me to get to like hear your side of it and creating it. Because I also think that there's something interesting about reading someone else's work is that you get to know a little piece of them without really knowing the connections. But when you can actually talk about it like we have, then you get to see those connections and see like how this book came from you, right? Came from Jess. And so, yeah, thank you for talking with me about your book and all the other books and everything like that. Do you mind if I wrap up? Yeah, with some rapid fire questions?
Okay.
Yes.
I'm ready.
Okay, cool. So first question I have for you is what superpower do you wish that you had?
I'm thinking of all the powers that I know about.
Right? There's a lot. There's a lot of options.
There's so many. I think I would like to be super fast. I would like to be able to do like Dash does and be able to like run across the ocean to Europe.
Yes. Yes. So you want to be like the Incredibles Dash? That's his name.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Exactly. And some people would be
Yes.
like, well, then why don't you want to fly? I'm afraid of heights. So.
Oh, got
Yeah.
it. Not fun for you.
Yeah.
Then. You would
Yeah.
hate flying. Okay,
Exactly.
but like getting to just run super quick everywhere to the point where
Yeah.
people don't even see you running by. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. I love when someone gives me a new answer to this question because no one's answered that one yet. That's a great answer. Okay, next question. Are you a night owl or an early bird?
Early bird for sure.
Got
Less
it.
so now that I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm a little bit sleepy when I wake up, but I definitely am a person who once I'm up, I am up and I'm happy to be starting the day.
Yeah. What's your like ideal morning time? Wake up time.
My ideal time or like ideal like morning experience.
Both, actually. Give them to me both.
Okay. So my ideal wake time is always like when the sun is rising, just because I have south facing windows, and so I get the sun all throughout the day. And so if it's like anything past sunrise, I'm already gonna wake up anyway. And then this
Mm-hmm.
way I get a pretty view.
Yeah, you can't beat that. I love
Yeah.
that. Okay, what is a comfort meal for you? Your like favorite comfort meal?
So it used to be well, I guess it kind of still is. My dad makes amazing chili. Like the best chili I've ever had in my
Mm.
entire life. And I love it so much, but he lives across the country, so I don't get to have it that often. And like I said, I am pregnant and baby loves McDonald's French fries. Like
Oh,
adores them.
yes.
So I that is
Yes.
I can you even call it a comfort meal if you have it more than like once a week? Because I do.
Yes, because you're just comforting yourself on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I love McDonald's fries. Arguably, I think
Oh,
they're like the best fast food French fries that you can get. They're just, they always hit.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, how can you just can't beat them. I 100%
No.
agree with you. Okay, what is one thing that you are grateful for right now?
All of my beta readers, honestly. It's just been such an amazing experience to have people who not only wanted to read my book, but kept wanting to read it once they actually got their hands on it, and then like had such amazing feedback for me. It's all just been an incredible experience.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm so glad you're posting about this, by the way. Literally,
Oh
I
yeah.
just I'm liking every single story you post about it because I love to see it. So I'm really glad that you're posting that stuff.
I have a
Okay.
highlight of them on my my page.
Oh, do you? Okay, great, perfect. So if I need to go back and just like get a smile on my face, I'll go read
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Okay, and lastly, my final question for you is why do you think it's important in your own life to be brave?
I think if you're not brave, you end up missing a lot of chances, and I think that's that's the Wayne Gretzky saying, right? Like you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. But if you
Yeah.
don't have at least a little bit of bravery, then you end up missing a lot of stuff that could have been possible for you. And there's another quote that I have thought about ever since I first saw the movie. That have you seen We Bought a Zoo?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so there's a quote in it, and I think it's a book as well, but I've only seen the movie. But it says, all you need is 10 seconds of insane courage and you can make a huge change, or something along those lines as the end of the quote. And it's like, okay, if I can do something like, and it can take 10 seconds, like what are you going to do? Are you going to sit here for another 10 seconds, or are you going to do the thing that could end up being the best thing that ever happened to you? So I like also do that. If there's something that I can initiate in 10 seconds and just be like, well, I'm here now, so let's go get going with it. So I would say that that is important, is to take those chances, and you can only take those chances if you've got a little bit of bravery.
I love that. That's so, now I want to watch that movie. That's such a
Oh my
great
god, it's so
quote.
cute. It is so cute.
Okay, I'm gonna watch that tonight. I love it. All you need is 10 seconds of insane bravery, and you're just
Yeah,
like, you're set. I love it. That's
yeah.
amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. Before I let you go, Jess, is there anything you want to promote or share with the people?
Well, my debut novel, if I can repeat that, my debut novel, In Beds of Flowers, is in the process of being edited after beta reads, and I have found my cover artist. She is going to do an amazing job. I'm so excited for her to get started on her process. And then from there, I don't anticipate a pub date being too far off because I'm not a person who wants to sit on my book. I want you all to have it. So basically, as soon as I have the cover, which could be in like like a month, when I have that, I will probably be giving an update as to like at least pre-orders. So update
Yes.
soon.
So exciting. Yes, and I know I've already been like fangirling over this entire episode, but just like last snippet for anyone that's loves fantasy or you love romance or you just love a good story, like I highly, highly recommend this book. And the fact that you listen to this episode, if you're not already sold on it, then who are you and what's wrong with you? But you should still go and read it. I highly recommend. I'm so excited for it to be released and to see the cover photo. Oh my gosh, that's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be so cool. But yeah, thank you again, Jess. This is so great. I feel honored that we got to have this conversation. And yeah, I wish you all the luck with all your future work and creativity and amazingness. And yeah, so much love.
Thank you so much for having me. And just know that anytime someone says, I'm looking for a copy editor, proofreader, you're going to be on the list of my DMs.
Yay! That's me. I love it. This is awesome. Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode of the Brave Bitches podcast. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, share, review, all that good stuff. Also follow me on Instagram at Hannah Soul Marie or at Brave Bitches without the I for some behind the scenes look and clips from the episode. Again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.